I'm Evan Savage, and I'm a developer fellow with Code for Canada.
And I'm Aakash Harpalani, part of the Transportation Services Division at the City of Toronto. And this is a map of Toronto overlaid with 66 markers across the city. Each of these dots represents someone that died on our streets last year. 41 of them were pedestrians, 13 were motorcyclists or cyclists, 12 were motorists, and all of them were preventable and unacceptable. Each of these dots also represents a story. Someone who was a brother, a daughter, someone whose family and friends loved them and missed them dearly. Our mission under the Vision Zero program is to completely eliminate traffic-related fatalities and serious injuries on our streets. But in order to do this, we need to start redesigning the way we move, intersection by intersection, street by street.
We'd like to introduce you to Julie. Julie is a mother who walks her son to school every day. And along the way, they have to cross a busy street that looks like this. Now, those flashing X's above the crosswalk are there to warn drivers to stop for pedestrians. But they're not always obeyed. Sometimes drivers just zoom right through it. Every morning, Julie and her son come to this intersection. She grips her son's hand tightly, presses the button multiple times, and as she's crossing, makes eye contact with the drivers, hoping that this will convince them to stop. It's a pretty harrowing experience, especially with her son right there, and she thinks it could be made a lot safer. So she calls 311 and asks the city to consider installing a traffic light.
Cue Terry. Terry's an investigator in traffic operations, and he makes traffic lights happen. When someone like Julie calls 311, Terry's the person that jumps into action behind the scenes. He starts collecting information on Julie's intersection, requests the data he needs, and then uses his technical expertise to make an informed recommendation. Like Julie, Terry is also a pedestrian, a cyclist, a driver, a road user. He really relates to Julie's story and wants to make sure that A, if a traffic light is warranted at the intersection, that it happens quickly, and B, if it's not, that Julie understands why. If we want our city streets to be safer, and we want residents to feel safer using our streets, we need to ensure that people like Terry have the tools to do their best work.
And that's where the Code for Canada fellows come in. Now, the city has been trying to modernize the systems and processes that Terry and others have used for a long time. But these are big, complex systems with lots of stakeholders, and all of them expect to be able to continue to do their jobs as modernization is underway. It was our job to figure out a path through this and move the project forward. Working side by side with staff, we wanted to understand what goes on behind the scenes. One of the main things we came to understand was that the sort of work Terry does in response to requests like Julie's is representative of staff needs more broadly. Staff need to look at the available data in the context of a map. Staff need to bring together multiple kinds of data to perform complex analysis. And then staff need to communicate across divisions around this data and these analyses. By making things easier for Terry, we could take the first step towards making things easier for a lot of other people. So we started with applications that looked like this, and we asked a whole lot of questions. What's confusing? What's missing? And also important, what is already working that needs to keep working? All in all, we conducted 23 interviews over the course of 2 months across the city. There were some days where we were literally visiting every corner of the city to talk to people. And one of the main things we found is that staff doing transportation-related work rely really, really heavily on two major systems, Crash and Flow. Crash here on the left, that's the system that stores all of the city's collision data. Flow, on the right, stores what we call traffic volume data. That is, data about how many people are using our roads and via which modes of transportation. But to do pretty much anything that's transportation related, you need to bring these two data sets together, which meant that staff were constantly switching back and forth between Crash and Flow to do pretty much anything.
Don't even get me started on just trying to view both of these data sets on the same map.
These systems were built in the 80s, and I don't mean that in a tried and true sense. I mean that in a these don't work for what we need them to do anymore sense. To put that in context, Vision Zero was only adopted in July 2016 by Council as part of the road safety plan. That's a full 35 years after these applications were first introduced to the city.
35 years is a long time. Cities change, neighborhoods grow, and road safety plans become less car-centric. The problem is that our systems haven't caught up. They still use outdated maps. Some types of data are still collected and stored manually in non-digital formats. On the left is a hand-drawn collision diagram that took a co-op student sitting on the ground floor of City Hall an entire day to make. How can we prioritize and examine safety interventions across an entire city at that rate? On the bottom right is a physical pen and paper worksheet used to collect pedestrian safety data. How can we give vulnerable road users primary consideration, let alone even equal consideration, if collecting the requisite data is slow and costly? The short answer is that we can't, that our systems that were built in the 1980s don't meet our needs in 2019.
So we saw out of all this chaos an opportunity. What if Terry had one integrated, revamped platform to help him conduct investigations? Terry would need to find the available data and request data that's missing. Once all this data is assembled, Terry then needs to build an investigation report so that council can have the information they need to act on Julie's request.
As the fellows started diving into the process, we discovered it looked something like this. People like Terry would fill out a form to request the data they needed. Invariably, there'd be a lot of back and forth over the phone and over email, trying to fill in the important details that this form was missing. And when you finally got all of that right, you'd wait, and wait, and wait some more, until about 3 months later, you finally got your data.
So all this waiting is obviously a huge pain point, and we had lots of people tell us that. How do we address this? We started by sketching lots of possible designs to meet user needs. And from those sketches, together with follow-up interviews and workshops, we surfaced promising solutions that made their way into early design mocks. Those design mocks turned into prototypes, and we put those prototypes in front of our users early and often to get their feedback. By doing that, we figured out things that would have taken us a lot longer to figure out that fundamentally changed how we thought about the problem. Our original prototypes were really focused on this question of how do we make investigations better and faster? And our users were telling us loud and clear that what they really cared about was quick, reliable access to the underlying data, whether or not they were doing an investigation. By gaining these insights and then acting upon them in a rapid, iterative, and agile manner, we were able to reach our first alpha launch mid-June. Within 24 hours, over 40 investigators around the city were using the system, and we'd already started to get our first user-submitted bug reports, which is an exciting thing, by the way.
Putting an alpha out and seeing how our staff responded to this real, tangible thing that they could immediately play around with, and yes, poke holes into, was incredibly satisfying for our team. But it also validated the process for others at the city, who could see firsthand that the fellows were dedicated to really understanding their needs and problems, that they had real influence over this thing that was at the core of their jobs.
And this part really came to validate this process for others at the city as well, who could see, as Aakash saw throughout this process, firsthand how the Code for Canada fellows were, we really brought with us a commitment to understanding their problem and figuring out how we could map our digital service delivery expertise onto their deep domain understanding of the problem. So what did we end up building here? In short, we're building a system we call Move. Move combines collision data, traffic volume data, and eventually other sources of data as well into a single place that it allows all these data sets to work together. Move brings together crash, flow, and some of those arcane paper forms you saw earlier into one seamless end-to-end application that we can eventually incrementally build upon to meet more and more user needs around the city. Now, this next part has a video, which I sincerely hope will actually work. So brace yourselves. All right, we have liftoff. Here's what that actually looks like. So Terry comes to Move, searches for location quickly and easily. There's no more old outdated maps, no more messing around with MapQuest era map interfaces. finds the location, can click on it to view what data is available. And from there, Terry can also go in and see what are the available reports. Now, this doesn't seem revolutionary, but this actually used to be in a completely separate tool altogether. So it really highlights how we're integrating some of those use cases that are required next to each other. Okay, so Terry knows by this point what data is needed, what is missing. We have a speed volume request account here, but it's 10 years old, so we're going to request one of those to update it. But we also want to validate Julie's concerns about the crosswalk to council, so we're going to conduct a pedestrian crossover observation so that we can get that hard data. Now, in the part where we provide the details, a lot of this was on the original paper form, such as when the data is needed by, some of the reasons, but there's also things that aren't on there, like days of the week. And these are the sorts of things that Terry would constantly find follow-up calls and emails about. We put that all right here alongside a streamlined version of the rest. Hits confirm once it's ready, instantly receives a confirmation. There's no more daily phone calls to figure out where the data went, and users can always track the status of the request right from within Move. Now, this might all seem like relatively straightforward application building, and it is to some degree, but it sits upon a whole lot of behind-the-scenes platform building work over the course of the fellowship to rebuild and reimagine how the city is collecting, storing, and managing its transportation-related data.
And that's why this project is just the beginning. The work that our team was enabled to do will allow us to make Move a truly integrated data platform built from the ground up to address not just current mobility, but the challenges of future mobility as well. But the fellowship was about so much more than just building a piece of software to address a problem. Working alongside the fellows has completely changed the way we think about redesigning our processes. Too often we get lost in a world of requirements and RFPs without returning back to the fundamental question. Why are we doing this in the first place? As a division that's responsible for the transportation network for an entire city and the safety of Torontonians that travel our streets, we have no shortage of problems that are ripe for reimagination. And that has us excited to tackle other projects using the incredible data we have at our disposal to make our city safer for all residents, no matter how they move through it.
Which brings us back to Julie. This is what her intersection looks like now. Imagine how much safer her and her son feel now that they can cross something like this instead of the crosswalk was there before. And imagine how much better they feel about the city knowing that their call to 311 resulted in real, tangible change.
Now let's be clear. Better data and software isn't going to solve road safety on its own. It's not going to eliminate traffic-related fatalities overnight. But Move will significantly improve our ability to make better, quicker decisions. Because Vision Zero at its core is a data-driven program. We rely on evidence to figure out where changes need to happen and what those changes should be. Being able to better access and use data is a foundational step in allowing us to move from a map that looks like this to one that looks like this. Thank you. Merci.